Hello, advanced social psychology students. Welcome to Unit 2, Module 10, Chapter 9, Aggression. Okay, let's get into the PowerPoint slides. And I will say, when you look at these PowerPoint slides, you're going to go, whoa, there's only two. Next week you have your exam. And so I am trying to keep the material shorter. Aggression is an amazing topic. It is so fascinating. And some of the models out there are really involved and very interesting. Your book doesn't really talk about most of the current models and instead spends its time going through what are the evolutionary reasons why aggression may exist? What are the emotional reasons why aggression may exist? The situational reasons why aggression may exist, the personality, the individual differences, and the cultural reasons why it might exist. So it gives you a nice overview without going into any of the specific models. And if I were to go into the specific models, it's a lot of information, and I just don't think we need to add that to the course. I think what's in the textbook is going to be enough for you. There's plenty of material for this Unit 2 exam without adding more aggression models. So, all right, so I just split it up to give an overview of the chapter and to give you some information that might not be in the chapter of defining aggression and then the factors that affect aggression. So when we talk about defining aggression, I just took this right out of your textbook. Behavior that is intended to harm another person who does not wish to be harmed. That is the definition of aggression. So I love how your textbook says, like a dentist who's giving you a shot, Novocaine, and it really hurts, and he's not intending to harm you. In fact, he has to put you in a little bit of harm in order to help you. And so, or put you in a little bit of pain in order to help you. So aggression is always the intention to hurt someone who doesn't want to be hurt. Okay, now what's violence? Violence is aggression that has extreme physical harm, like injury, death as its goal. Okay, so it's not just, a little bit of harm. It's, you're trying to break their arm, you're trying to kill them. So, and there's two different kinds of aggression that your book highlights. There's aggression that's more impulsive, that you didn't think it through, you just out of emotion acted this way. Sometimes it's called emotional aggression, sometimes it's called impulsive aggression. This is aggression that occurs with only a small amount of forethought or intent, and it's determined primarily by impulsive emotions. So you walk in and see your husband sleeping with your best friend, and I don't know, you blow them away. That's violence, but it's emotional aggression or impulsive aggression. If you thought it through, you wouldn't have done that. Does that make sense? Versus instrumental or cognitive aggression, which is aggression that's intentional, planned. Sometimes it's also institutionalized. So this is instrumental or cognitive aggression, right? Now that we have an idea of what aggression is and what violence is and the different types of it, I'm just going to go through a big long list of factors that affect aggression. And so your book talks about the emotions that affect how emotions can affect aggression. We have the frustration hypothesis that says, it was like one of the first theories of aggression, and it said that frustration always leads to aggression. And if an aggressive act is given, it's because the person who acted aggressively was frustrated. In other words, there's a 1-to-1 ratio between frustration and aggression. In reality, that's not true. We now know that frustration leads to a propensity or a desire to act aggressively, but people don't always act aggressively. And you can act aggressively without having been frustrated. So it's not exactly right, but it does give us some idea of how the early models. And then Freud, again, super early model. Think about when Freud psychoanalytic theory was popular. Freud really believed that we had like all this tension that built up with us and we needed a way to release it. And so acting aggressively was a catharsis, and even watching people act aggressively could be a catharsis. And so again, There's not that much research that supports that. There's some, but it's not a whole bunch. Now, here's some things that we absolutely know for sure. Aggressive cues lead people to act more aggressively. People will act more aggressively if there are aggressive cues around them than if there are not. And I think we talked about this a little bit, the very first lecture video about research methods when we talked about demand characteristics. A researcher, Berkowitz, was giving people the opportunity to act aggressively. So he was able to shock someone, and he got to determine, and really they weren't shocked, but they don't know that. And they got to determine how long they would be shocked, how high a voltage they'd be shocked at, and how many shocks to deliver. So it's an intention to harm someone who doesn't want to be harmed. It's aggression. And what Berkowitz did is he was looking at his data and he's like, this is so strange. It seems like at the beginning of the semester, people acted much less aggressively than toward the end of the semester. I wonder what's going on here. And then he remembered that his lab was half lab and half storage area. And in the storage area part, toward the end of the semester, there were some toys there that are kind of aggressive toys, like toy guns, toy knives, rope, that kind of thing. And he thought, I wonder if those aggressive cues worked as a demand characteristic. Characteristics is a research environment that suggests or demand a participant act a certain way, and then they do. And act, so these aggressive cues sort of led the people to act more aggressively. So that's when he did actual studies where he randomly assigned people to conditions where there are either aggressive cues around or not. And sure enough, when there are aggressive cues around, people are much more likely to act aggressively. More shocks, higher voltage, and longer lasting. And so if you want to avoid being harmed through someone who's acting aggressively, you want to be in a spot that doesn't have a lot of aggressive cues. I always laugh at some of those, what I call very masculine rooms, where there's like they've got a whole bunch of guns on the wall, and animals have been killed with the guns, and then there's swords on the wall, hanging on the wall, and there's all these violent cues or these aggressive cues all around the room. That's not a good place to have an argument with someone. Do you know what I mean? Let's not do conflict resolution in that room. You're likely, it could potentially not end well. Okay. Another thing is modeling, observational learning. We act more aggressively after watching someone else act aggressively. And so we've got the famous Bobo doll experiment, which you've already read, you've already watched a video about that one of the earlier weeks. So when we watch an adult beat up a Bobo doll, we're more likely to act aggressively toward that Bobo doll than if we haven't watched that. Everything that we learned early in the semester about reinforcement, again, if we are positively or negatively reinforced for acting aggressively, we're going to be more likely to act aggressively in that situation at a later time. It's basically the definition of operant conditioning, right? So if you're on if you punch someone and you get some positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement for doing that, you're going to be more likely in that situation to punch that person again. However, if you're punished for it, then you're less likely to punch someone again in that situation. And so you can see why, as a culture, as a society, we like to punish aggressive behavior so that we'll have it less likely to occur. Okay. And we definitely don't want to do anything that reinforces it. There are also a bunch of environmental effects that can end up affecting aggression that you might not know about. Believe it or not, people are more likely to act aggressively in noisy environments than in quiet environments. At one point, it was thought, well, areas in a community that have a lot of noise, like the areas that are near airports, they tend to be more there's more aggression and violence that happens in those neighborhoods. At the beginning, or at one point, people hypothesized, well, that's because that's where low-income housing tends to be, and there's more violence in those kinds of communities. But they went through and tried to control for all of that. And even in nice communities that are built near airports where there's a lot of noise, there's more violence, more aggression than in quieter neighborhoods. And it's not just neighborhoods. They brought it into the laboratory and specifically studied it. And people are more aggressive in noisy environments. Heat is an interesting one. I should probably have a question mark next to that. People are more aggressive when they're so hot that they're uncomfortable, but not so hot that they can't move. They're also tend to be more aggressive when they're so cold that they're uncomfortable, but not so cold that they can't move. So it's not just heat, it's an uncomfortable temperature. We tend to be more aggressive in uncomfortable temperatures. Now, why do I have heat written down in the slide? Because there's much more research that looks at heat, because indoor heating exists almost everywhere where there's cold environments, but air conditioning does not exist everywhere in hot environments. So when you take it to the real world, it's really easy to show that the hotter the temperature is, the more violent crimes happen, the more aggression there is. It's very easy to show the relationship between heat and aggression. Also, if you just look at our movies and culture, we believe this. I mean, I think of like Stella, would that, Tennessee Williams play, would that happen if they had had good air conditioning? Like, probably not. Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, would that have happened if they weren't so hot? And because it is so hot, they're outside, because inside it's stifling hot because they don't have air conditioning. And because they're outside, they're all in each other's faces and getting in each other's way, and they're all so uncomfortable. There's this sense of course, aggression and violence is going to erupt out of this. There's less cultural view for this idea that when we're really cold, we're going to act aggressively. But culturally, when you're really cold, you tend to go inside, and you're just with your family. So you're not around other people as much. And so maybe there's less knowledge of the violence that might be going on, or less knowledge of the aggression that might be going on. And maybe because there's less people you're aggressive toward. But in the research lab, both heat and cold, if they're uncomfortable, but not so hot or cold that you stop moving, they lead to aggression, or more people act more aggressively. Drugs, so you've got THC and marijuana. And small doses of marijuana don't affect aggression at all. High doses of marijuana, people will actually be less aggressive, okay? So this idea that marijuana increases aggression, that does not bear out in the research. Now, I'm not saying, everybody let's get high. The marijuana has shown in some research to lead to amotivational syndrome, which means you don't act aggressively, but you also don't act to complete goals that you've set for yourself. You're not goal oriented. You're not motivated to do anything. You're not motivated to help people. You're not motivated to harm people, but you're not really doing anything. Does that kind of make sense? Now, alcohol, in small doses, it lowers aggression, but in high doses, it increases aggression, very much so. The data on that is clear, clear, clear. Now, not so much alcohol that you're passing out and you can't act aggressively, but large enough doses where you can still move, and you are going to be much more aggressive than with lower doses of alcohol or no alcohol at all. Arousal, we act more aggressively when we're aroused. So if you're playing tennis, and your heart is beating, your mouth is dry, your palms are sweating, and you just finished playing tennis, and someone comes over and it like you're much more likely to act aggressively than if you were calmly sitting there and someone came and started yelling at you or something. So when we have higher levels of arousal, it's easier for us to act aggressively. Partly because when you act aggressively, you do have to have high arousal. So you're already that much closer to the arousal state that you need to be in to exhibit the aggressive behaviors. So when you put all of these things together, one thing that I always taught my kids was think of course, you want to avoid places where there's going to be a lot of aggression. So I used to say, think about a certain like dance club. If you've got everyone dancing, so their arousal level is high, there's lots of alcohol. So you've got people with large amounts of alcohol, that's going to increase the likelihood of people acting aggressively. Because everyone's crowded together dancing, it's usually hot. That's going to increase aggression, and it's noisy. You know, the dum, dum, dum. That's going to increase aggression. If on the walls of this place there's aggressive cues, which sometimes I've seen, you go into an establishment like that and they'll have, you know, guns and stuff. If that's sort of if there's any aggressive cues on the walls or anything, that is absolutely going to increase aggression. And if people have negative emotions because someone just got rejected when they tried to ask someone to dance and the person said no and they get upset, and certainly if there's any modeling of aggression, so one person starts to punch another, then a whole bunch of the people are going to join in and start punching. So be careful. I used to say to my kids, if you want to go dancing, I'm all for it. But if you notice all these factors, that is not a safe place. You know, if at the end there's a shooting there and everyone's like, how did that happen? I just want to say, did you look at the research at all? We should almost expect that to happen. So here are the factors of aggression, and I know there's a lot on this Unit 2 exam, and I hope you do well next week on it, and feel free to email me if you have any questions about this chapter of aggression or about the Unit 2 exam. My email address is marydz@cameron.edu. Okay, we will see you the week after the exam.